Welcome to the Million Vegan Grandmothers podcast. And today I have Anja Heister, and she's going to be here. And we're going to have this beautiful, we've already had a beautiful, deep conversation, but we're going to continue it on. She's going to be at a convergence that's coming up. And so, one of the blessings of having our VCOP, which stands for Vegan Convergence of the People, is I get to interview some of the presenters who it's always such an honor. And in 2022, Anja wrote a book called Beyond the North American Model of Wildlife Conservation, From Lethal to Compassionate Conservation. So thank you, Anja, Dr. Anja, for being here. Really appreciate your time and your presence.
Thank you, Tami. Thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
Well, I read the beginning of your book and you were telling a story of a pine marten caught, snared in a tree. And I'm wondering, is that the beginning of the energetics that brought this book about, or was that afterwards?
Well, the pine marten story, where we came across a trapped pine marten, a beautiful animal, suffering in a leg-hold trap. That happened a long, long time ago, and I can't really say legally. I don't want to say exactly when and where it was, but we were able to free this beautiful animal, and it was quite a transformational experience for me. I'm originally from Frankfurt, Germany. I've studied biology in Frankfurt, and during my study, I've spent a lot of time on the streets protesting vivisection and other places of animal exploitation. And but when I moved to Montana, which was about 25 years ago, and while I was protesting during my time during my biology study in Frankfurt, when we were protesting against fur, I
Mhm.
had no idea what to expect when I moved to Montana, and I had no idea how much of a huge business trapping animals for fur still is in the state of Montana, and I was absolutely appalled. So it was a very transformational experience for me. Um, and I actually, after that, I decided to do start my PhD, and I actually focused on untrapping during my dissertation. Yeah, during my study. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And we had, when we spoke before this conversation, we were talking about, this kindred kind of spirit that we share of growing up and spending lots of time outside in the wilderness and it being such a magical place. And I'm sure that's where the seeds for you wanting to protect the wild came from.
Yeah. Yeah. To be honest, I mean, I spent a lot of time in the forest during my childhood. Why? I'm not quite sure. It was definitely a place for me to go to find solitude and a place to escape to, and to be surrounded by, yeah, like you said, kindred spirits that are not necessarily humans. I grew up as a single child, and my parents had a lot of problems during my childhood. And so for me, it was really a place of finding solitude and recharging my inner well, so to speak. And there was nothing more beautiful to me than sitting quietly in the forest and seeing a deer come by, or listening to the birds sing, or watching the fish in a pond, and so, yeah, it was the forest and the animals were absolutely so important to me. Feeling that connection with other animals, was so important to me, and it was actually important to me, right? I would almost say I was born as an animal rights activist. And my parents, I mean, they were meat eaters, but they were also very compassionate toward our dogs. We always had dogs, during my childhood. And I think my father was a closet biologist. He would alert me to make a big step over a trail of ants in the
Mm.
backyard so that I wouldn't step on these animals and, things like that. So it was very confusing. The lessons I learned from my parents, because they were not consistent, was they were confusing to a point, but I had that deep, deep, deep love and appreciation and a really, really strong sense for justice right from the start.
Yeah. Yeah. I had the same beautiful energy with my father as well. He was very close to nature. He grew up in the bush, uh, completely off the grid on dirt floors, dirt floor huts, really. And he always drew my attention. But it is confusing when you see a moose hanging in the garage and that's what you're going to be eating for the winter. But I understood it as an adult as the way that they could feed their family at one point when that's all they knew. But they really did appreciate what was around them. So but now that we know better, we must do better. And how is this understanding of animal rights, like the rights of sentient beings to live their life? How has that evolved alongside your relationship with the natural world as you wrote this book and understanding that even the wild animals don't have rights, do they, Anja?
No.
Mm-hmm.
No, neither domestic animals nor the wild animals have rights at all. They don't have rights to exist. They don't have rights to live. They don't have rights to freedom and liberty and happiness and dignity and a life of no harm. They don't have life. They don't have rights for property. They really have nothing. And it became so blatantly clear to me during the research for my book. I mean, I knew it before, but I mean, the depth of our relationship with nature and with other beings, which is grounded primarily in human supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized the depth of that grounding and how embedded this anthropocentric worldview actually is in our culture and how we treat others, how we really prevent them from having a good life, with exceptions, of course. I mean, the majority of humanity, I think, is suffering from this human supremacy worldview, and that really directs how we act and how we think and how we behave and how we treat other animals. And it's a story. It's a tragic story. It's a story of tragedy, really. And so now I think, given the fact that about 100 billion land animals are being consumed worldwide for meat, for flesh, plus the dairy products, plus the trillion of marine lives that we consume every year, the conditions under which these animals are being kept and raised. And it is just absolutely appalling to me. And I think we're reaching a tipping point just with the climate as well. I think our relationship with other beings is reaching a tipping point, and where disaster looms, beyond which a disaster looms. And I think we're being asked more and more urgently to change our way of being as humans. And I think it's more and more urgent. And in terms of wild animals, I mean, here in Montana, where I live, about 60,000 animals are being trapped for their fur every year, just here in Montana. And hunters nationwide kill between 100 and 200 wild animals every year, only in the US. And trappers kill between 5 and 21 million animals for their fur. So the extension of the disastrous relationship that we have, the view of other animals that we have, of just objects, of things to use lethally or not, just to meet our frivolous interests. I think it all has to change.
Mm. Well, it's like Dr. Sailesh Rao often says, we all have a vegan heart. It's just we become desensitized and confused. And
Yeah,
Dr. Will Tuttle always says, we're just following orders. So it's almost like that the reprogramming ourselves into what one of the grandmothers of the Million Vegan Grandmothers, beautiful Judy Carman, wrote in her book, Homo Ahimsa, who we really are and how we're going to save the world. That we need to become, instead of these Homo sapiens, which are supposed to be the intelligent ones, we need to become Homo Ahimsas.
yeah, yeah.
And
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, by the way.
mhm,
Yeah, from predator species to Homo Ahimsa. I love that.
yeah, yeah. So maybe that's where we're all moving towards. There's some prophecies that say that we're moving into a time when we will that will follow peace. 50, we're moving in the 50 years towards peace on earth. So I'm going to hold out for that because the other just feels too hard to look at. My partner
Yeah, yeah.
wrote a couple questions I'd like to ask you. And so,
Sure, sure.
yeah, he said, there's a sense that veganism, he says, my sense is that veganism takes what you call the animal centric ethical view rather than the ecocentric view, in the sense that it seems to call most strongly for the elimination of individual animal suffering and would not promote the idea of sacrificing individual animals, even for the health of ecosystems as a whole. And I think he's talking about an article he read. Would you comment on this, assess it? So,
I couldn't agree more with him, because, and this was actually the motivation, and also I hope this is the essence of my book,
mhm.
the where I just try to convey the message, that it all starts with the individual animal. In my mind, when we get to the point where we see the intrinsic value of a bee, of one single bee, or of one single bug, or one single bird, that might look like many, many others. But when we finally are able to perceive that value of that individual animal, I think then we're good to go, you know. But look at this. I mean, the view of the whole, that's how I call it, the view of the whole, the land, or the view of the species or the animal population. That is actually what makes this massive hunting and trapping and fishing possible, because our focus is distracted. We're looking at the whole, right? We don't want the population to collapse. But in the meantime, we can just kill individual animals, and we figure out, there's this concept in science behind the North American model of wildlife conservation that is the maximum sustainable yield, right? Where the science has developed a concept that determines the number of a population, a number of individual animals that can be killed without the population collapsing. And that is not right. That is, from an ethical point of view, is not right, because every individual animal wants to live, wants to survive, wants to have a family if they're social animals. Everything wants to survive and live. Not only us. We always think only about us human beings, because everything in our world is just so limited in our focus. Everything is just so human centric. But we really need to expand our focus and also expand the circle of our morality to be more inclusive, and realize that every single animal wants to live. Nobody wants to die. And that's where we need to go. That we need to come to that realization, and really valuing and respecting and appreciating and celebrating the worth and the intrinsic value of every single animal. That's where I'm coming from.
And get to know them.
And get to know them. That's a really good point. Yes.
Really study them, really be present to them. That's when you
Yes.
really appreciate
Yeah.
whether it's the squirrel that's chasing the chickadee from the seeds on the deck, or just really enjoy and listen to them and call them. And yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
calling. Yeah, yeah.
I agree.
Well, we know that animal agriculture is the leading force behind deforestation and biodiversity loss and climate chaos. If we phased it out and returned to land to its natural state, what kind of healing do you think we could witness?
I think healing would occur on many, many different levels. Let's start with the land that would be made available, for reforesting, for planting trees. So let's just assume if we all became vegan overnight, land would be made available, of this at the size of the continent of Africa, which obviously is huge.
Mhm.
And we would need only 20% of that land to nourish and sustain us. And 80% of the majority of that continent, basically, not the literal continent of Africa, obviously, but the size of that land, right? Could be filled with forests again, with green space. And we all know how important green space is for our own mental and spiritual, emotional health. So there would be a huge benefit, obviously. Freeing up land and reforesting that land would make space, much needed habitat available for wild animals. The animals that would be freed from factory farms. I hate that word farms, but I'm not sure what other word to use. I think Matthew Scully in his new book calls these factory farms fear factories.
Mm.
I think that's a much more appropriate term. But these animals, ideally, these animals would all be freed and placed in sanctuaries, which we then would have the land for. So I think the healing would occur on multiple levels. The land could heal. The environment overall would heal. Biodiversity could flourish. Wild animals, every single animal would flourish. Waterways would flourish. I think we would decrease pollution drastically, which would benefit everyone, of course, and then our own health could heal, um, and so it would be greatly beneficial if we went vegan, every one of us.
And I sometimes feel like with knowing this, because once you know, you can't not know. But knowing this, and then I think we're in the stage just before change. There's a really big stage of chaos before everybody figures it out. And we're there because, we're hearing everybody talk about the carnivore diet now.
Right.
No,
Right.
it's like, oh my goodness, seriously, there's nothing about the human body that's a carnivore. Nothing,
There's
nothing about us.
nothing,
Nothing
absolutely
about
not.
us is carnivore.
Right. And Tammy, lately I started to think about meat eating as an addiction. And I haven't really done any research on that, but I'd like to explore that a little bit better because people are just so adamant
Mhm.
about consuming other animals. And I know it's a very, very complex issue in
Mhm.
terms of people having very different reasons for consuming other animals. But most of the time, it's so culturally determined and individually unreflected. That
Absolutely.
I sometimes think, where is the transition to addiction? Where we just do whatever everybody else does without even thinking about it. And then we get to the point where we think, I can't live without eating meat. I can't live without drinking milk, so where does
It's
the addiction
addictive.
start?
Yeah,
It is,
I studied with Dr. Gabriel Cousens a lot, and he talks a lot about how stimulating meat is. It stimulates the system. It makes people feel like, like they're powerful on some stimulated level. It has that kind of chemical response in the body. And dairy, the casein dairy is known as casein morphine. It's known to create a morphine effect in the body. So it is very, very addictive in the hormones, and it doesn't belong to us. But it, until we become Homo Ahimsa, it's hard for people to give up their addictions because people don't have the ability in an overstimulated, insane world to be able to get calm if they got quiet enough. I think there's a real psychological point that if we got quiet enough, how would we be able to deal with it? If we really knew what was going on, how would we be able to add that onto us and into us? And, my partner and I started writing a book a while ago called Grief Mapping, and it's mapping out our grief and adding on 5 stages after Kubler-Ross's stage of acceptance. It's like, well, we can't just accept things anymore. And that's not what she meant. I really very much value Kubler-Ross's work in grief. Yeah. But it's like where our stage of 5 stages pick up is the first one is the felt sense shock. So we have to feel the shock. Then we have to move into empathy and compassion for ourselves and others. And then we move into creative action. We have to move right into creative action because we have to move that grief through, whether it's dancing and then taking some activism work, and then community, care and community, and then pathways to heal. We have to all develop these pathways to heal. So where maybe you would like to write the forward for a book when we're done it, but love that.
Oh my God, this sounds so fascinating. I would love to. I would be absolutely honored to do that. And I do have
some. What we're doing. We don't have enough room in us. So that the whole basis of this book came to me around after I wrote Earth Gut and my son died. And I was like, and a whole bunch of things happened at once. 2 dogs died. Both my parents had just died, and 2 of my friends commit suicide. And it was just like a lot of things at once. Where is the room? And I had to literally unplug from the world for weeks. And I just started doing it. Immediately, I did these steps. I felt the shock. Then I would, be completely empathetic and compassionate to myself. And then I went right into creative action. I started writing poetry and dancing and because I had to move the grief through. And then I realized that people can't look because they have too much accumulated grief. I really believe that.
Yeah.
Don't have
makes sense.
Space. We have to make space to deal with our grief and the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So that's what we're doing.
That's very fascinating. So count me in, writing you forward. I would feel honored.
That sounds beautiful. I want to ask one more question. Paul wrote that he would. So you said in one of your articles, you wrote the choice between happy chickens or happy penguin pits foods, animals against wild animals, avoiding the question of human behavior and the human interest of eating animal products, which are really the crux of most, if not all, major problems from contributing to climate change, ecosystem destruction, and water pollution. Based on what you write here, it seems that there might be no conflict between veganism's animal-centric view and the ecocentric view, in the sense that one of the veganism's primary goal, eliminating animal agriculture, would accomplish the goals of both camps. Would you say that veganism thereby manages to avoid what you call the spurious choice between individual and collective ethics?
Well, I mean,
I'm an academic, so I told him I would ask those 2 questions for him.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly if I understand your question correctly, Tami. So let me give it a try. So I really believe that veganism is at the root of truly everything. Like I said before, I mean, it is. And it is not, I mean, veganism is so much more than just a diet, right? I mean, veganism is a lifestyle. I mean, we've talked about this before. many times. I have talked with many people about this, because oftentimes people do think that veganism is just a diet, but it is so much more. I mean, I think through ethical veganism, when we come to realization that everything is life around us, and an ecocentric view acknowledges that. But what an ecocentric view often does not is it does not recognize the intrinsic value of the individual being and the importance of that individual being, not only for the ecosystem, but the individual animal, individual animal's importance for her or his mate, for example, or the importance of the individual animal for the family. I mean, I'm thinking of wolves, for example. Wolves are being slaughtered left and right in this country, especially here in the western states, but also Wyoming, well, here, Idaho and Montana for sure. Hunters and trappers killed close to 300 wolves just within the last few months. And so, with no considerations as to what kind of a ripple effect that has through not only through the ecosystem, because of all of a sudden so many, let's say 300 fewer wolves exist, but what about the mates of these individual animals? When they had a mate, the mate is left to their own devices all of a sudden. Maybe they have pups right now, and the father is dead, or the mother is now being shot. Or look at bears, for example. Black bears are being killed. I think over 1,000 bears are being killed here in Montana. Over 500 bears are being killed in the spring alone. The spring bear hunt. It is one of the most appalling activities that hunters engage in. Oftentimes the mothers, the bears just come out of their dens. They are preoccupied, they're hungry, they're preoccupied with finding food. So the mother bears try to hide their cubs, behind bushes or up in the trees. And then they go on and try to find food for themselves, to nourish themselves, and then they get shot. And then what happens to the cubs? They starve to death. I mean, where I'm coming from, it is, I see the crucial importance of the individual animal. Everything starts with acknowledging, respecting, celebrating the importance of every individual animal, because that's what we do for one another. That's how we should treat one another. We should treat every human being as the most important thing on this earth, and every individual other animal as the most important thing on this earth. So I almost think it's the other way around in opposite of the ecocentric view. Everything starts with the individual animal, and then it takes a ripple effect, through their family, through their groups, through their populations, through their species, through their communities, through the ecosystems. Instead of looking at the ecosystem and then just reducing animals to their ecological function within that ecosystem, that is not enough. That's not sufficient. And it's not sufficient enough for us to change our ways and of realizing that we really need to transition from this human-centric view through, becoming Homo Ahimsa. So I don't know, Tami, if I answered your question.
I think one of the things that Paul had read in the article is he was trying to establish the difference between veganism and ecocentric views of the world, and that not necessarily everyone that loves nature or says they love nature really know how to support that. Mm-hmm. So it's a very conceptualized view. I like going out into the wilderness, but I I don't really know what's going on, and I don't really need to know what's going on. And so is there a clash with veganism and ecocentrism? Because sometimes there's this culling that goes on that's justified. And if we're a strict vegan, would we be okay with that? No, we wouldn't be. So then if
No.
there's a culling that's going on, it's happening because we've killed all the wolves. You know,
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
completely destroyed the apex predator balance. And
Hmm.
so if, you know, that you think the deer or the elk are overrunning your land or whatever it is, it's ridiculous. It's just the disturbing and not allowing the rebalancing. And it
Yeah.
appears to most of us that understand everything just needs to be left alone. We need to leave nature alone mostly. I mean, there might be a little bit of management in forests, cleaning up a little bit of forests so that maybe they're a little bit safer. But as far as wildlife goes, I think we just need to leave them alone. We certainly need to leave the oceans alone. The
Oh,
oceans are going to be
absolutely.
half.
Yeah. 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 Oh, absolutely. I think that's another part of the human supremacy worldview, right? Where we just assume to have the right to enter a forest or to empty out the ocean, for example, just for our interests, you know, and the depth and the brutality with which we enter these ecosystems and wreak a havoc is significant, you know. So I would absolutely agree with you. And just to your point, just maybe a last thought. I've come across so many conservationists, you know, many of whom would probably call themselves or they see themselves as ecocentrists, right? And neither are they vegans,
Hmm.
nor are they into seeing the value of the individual animal. So it's a very the vegan the ethical vegan view clashes, I would say, with the ecocentric view. Um, Unless somebody is an ecocentrist who also is a vegan and holds both perspectives, which is actually, if I understand you correctly, kind of the balance that we're looking at. I mean, we want to protect the whole, you know, the land, the population, and so forth, but we also want to protect the individual animal. So we see both and the balance between us and nature, because I think I think we should see ourselves as part of nature so that we don't feel that disconnect. At the same time, can we really retract from nature and leave everything alone? I'm not sure about that, but I think we can retreat, and certainly we need to retreat just to lessen our impact, you know, on other animals and on other on the ecosystems, you know, and find a much better balance.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I guess to
yeah.
clarify, when I say leave alone, most of the land can be left to take care of itself, and the ocean
Yes.
can do the same.
Yes.
And
Yes.
are we capable? Maybe if we're Homo Ahimsas, we would be capable, but we certainly don't need very much land to eat
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
thrive.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know if you've watched the documentary Milk with an ED on the end.
No, I have
It's a
not.
great documentary done in New Zealand, and they don't have any clean water anymore because of the dairy industry there.
Oh.
So it's really understanding this interconnection with animal agriculture. And it was done by a Maori man, actually, who they can't swim in their rivers. They can't swim in their lakes anymore
Mm.
from the dairy industry, completely
Mm.
contaminating all their water.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to have a choice. We're going to come compassionately into it and be the trailblazers, or we're going to come kicking and screaming and not wanting to give up. the things and then have to do our work then, have to do our internal
Yes.
work then. But
Yeah.
at some point, we have to do our internal work.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
would you say to our listeners right now, what you do for self-care, to rejuvenate yourself, to come back to knowing that a more compassionate world is possible?
So to be honest, I live in a state of despair most of the time because every time I go somewhere here in Montana, is really it's particularly in your face. You know, I see cows, cattle everywhere. You know, I see sheep and horses everywhere. I know where they end up, and it breaks my heart every single day, knowing what's happening on factory farms, you know, things like that. So this is to say that I have to be in nature, and oftentimes I prefer to be by myself, you know, just to recharge my or refill my own well. And so what I do is I either run with my dogs. I go into the forest and I run, or if I feel less energetic, I just go on a hike with my dogs. And we go every day, and we go for about between an hour and 2 hours. So that is most of my self-care. I do a little bit of yoga. I don't do it regularly. I should. And I read books, and I enjoy minutes or maybe hours even of solitude and quiet. You
Mhm.
know, just open the windows and listen to the birds. So that is what warms my heart, and that's what I really need. So that's my self-care. Yeah. And sometimes I bake vegan cookies.
With chocolate?
That's part of my self-care.
Does it have chocolate in it?
It does. It has oat milk chocolate yeah, in it. Yes.
Sounds good. Well, this has been a real pleasure, and I know that we will continue connecting. I really adore the work you do, your honesty, your transparency, and your focus on if we could truly look into the eyes of one animal and see them, truly see them, we will be changed. And
Yes.
I truly believe, and I've heard it many stories of it, most of us were never witnessed and awoken through another human. It was through an animal. So
Yeah.
thank you very
Yeah.
much for being
That's
here.
beautifully said, Tammy. And thanks again for the invitation. That was really, really lovely to be here and talking with you.
Thank you very much.